I walked into my sister's wedding completely alone, not because I lacked someone to bring, but because I needed to remember how it felt to stand unshielded. The venue in Savannah was stunning, all marble columns and crystal chandeliers, but every glance felt like a judgment. Eyes scanned my black dress, my unadorned hands, the empty space beside me. A few of Rachel's new in-laws tilted their heads, whispering the way people do when they want to be overheard. There she is, the older one. Still single, right? It stung more than I let on. I've pitched to investors who thought I was too young, coded through nights no one saw, but this room full of polite smirks and curated smiles, was a different battlefield. I could have turned around, but I didn't. Because this time, I wasn't here for them. I was here for me. Growing up in the Morgan household was like living on a stage I never auditioned for. From the moment she could speak in full sentences, Rachel was the one they chose to spotlight. Blonde, dimpled, always smiling, she had that effortless charm adults eat up like candy at church picnics. Relatives fawned over her braids while I stood nearby holding a book, always the quiet one with too many questions and not enough softness. When I was 10, I dismantled our microwave just to see if I could make it reheat more evenly. I did. Mom grounded me anyway, furious that I had ruined a working appliance. Meanwhile, Rachel got a standing ovation at the school talent show for lip-syncing to a country pop song in glittery cowgirl boots. I clapped too, of course. That's what ghosts do. Observe. We applaud, but we don't take up space. My world was circuits, patterns, and possibilities. I read about machine learning before most kids knew how to spell algorithm. By 14, I had coded a self-timer oven so our dinners wouldn't burn when Mom forgot them. I even made her a manual. She never used it. She said it made her feel stupid. Our parents didn't discourage me. They just didn't know what to do with me. "You'll grow out of this tech phase," my mom said once after I skipped a school dance to attend a robotics camp. Then she grounded me again. I remember thinking how strange it was to be punished for wanting to build something, while Rachel got gift cards for wearing a dress well. By high school, the gap between us was no longer subtle. Rachel dated football captains. I submitted research proposals. At family dinners, she was asked about prom and boyfriends, while I was met with vague nods and nervous glances when I brought up data ethics. Dad tried in his own way once. He asked, "So Claire, still doing your computer stuff?" It was well-meaning. It just didn't land. When Rachel got into college, there were banners, cupcakes, and a Facebook post with 200 likes. When I got a full scholarship to MIT, Mom said, "Wow, that's far." I was 17 and I learned how to pack light. I built my life in Seattle, first in co-working spaces and basement apartments, then in a glass-walled office of a company I created from scratch. I wasn't trying to win anyone's approval anymore, not really. But there was always that part of me, small, quiet, buried deep, that wondered what it might feel like to be enough in their eyes. Meanwhile, Rachel's life unfolded like a Pinterest board. Engagements, weddings, housewarmings. Her first marriage ended within 2 years. The second lasted longer until it didn't. Then came Ethan Whitmore, tall, monogrammed cufflinks, legacy trust fund, a name that rang bells in Southern social circles. Their engagement was splashed all over local magazines. My parents were elated. "Rachel finally found the right man," they said. No one asked how I was doing. When the wedding invitation arrived, it came with a phone call from Mom. "Claire," she said, voice sweet but cautious, "please remember this is Rachel's day." "I'm aware," I replied. "And maybe don't wear anything too sharp-looking, you know. No blazers or black suits. You're not giving a TED Talk." I smiled even though she couldn't see it. "Don't worry, Mom. I'll blend right in." Of course I wouldn't. I RSVP'd for one. Not because I had no one to bring, but because I refused to treat this like a performance. I wasn't someone's plus one. I was enough on my own. On the flight to Georgia, I worked through revisions on a paper I was co-authoring with a Stanford lab. We were finalizing a neural mapping framework for early Alzheimer's detection. something I cared deeply about. I stared at the screen, watching code compile, but my mind kept drifting to the little girl with flashlight books and cardboard circuits who never made it into the family photo albums. When I landed in Savannah, I checked into a small inn just outside the city center. It smelled like cedar and old brick, nothing like the air-conditioned luxury of the Whitmore estate. The rehearsal dinner was already underway, but I hadn't been invited. No surprise there. I spent the evening walking the cobblestone streets, reminding myself I belonged to a world that didn't require sequins or surnames to matter. The next morning, I pulled on a simple black dress, tailored, minimal, no sparkle. I twisted my hair into a low knot and skipped makeup except for mascara. I looked like myself. Maybe that was the most radical thing I could do. And when I stepped into that ballroom, they saw me. Not as a daughter, not as a sister, not as a guest. As the unspoken disappointment they never managed to dress up, but I didn't flinch. Because ghosts don't flinch, and I wasn't here to haunt their fantasy. I was here to reclaim my space in the story. Rachel looked radiant. That's the word people used. Radiant. I heard it at least 6 times before I'd even found my seat. Rachel looks radiant, doesn't she? Oh, she's absolutely glowing. She's finally found her match. 3rd time's the charm. No one said it with malice. They didn't have to. Their compliments were weapons made of silk, soft but pointed. Every praise for Rachel came with an unspoken comparison. Claire is brilliant, sure, but Rachel knows how to be loved. The ballroom looked like something out of a Southern bridal magazine. Ivory drapes, towering floral arches, a string quartet in one corner, and champagne fountains in another. Everything glistened. Even the guests looked curated, matching tones, glossy hair, families rehearsed to smile for the drone cameras flying overhead. I was seated near the back, of course, not out of spite, I'm sure, just logistics, or so my mother would claim. It's just easier to group people by side, she once told me at a previous wedding. You know, the bride's family further back so guests of honor can be closer. Translation: know your place. The Whitmores had claimed the front rows like they were born into them, which technically they were. Ethan's parents had that kind of frozen elegance that comes from years of controlling rooms like this. His mother, Marilyn, looked like her face had made a deal with a surgeon. No movement in exchange for eternal superiority. She never looked at me directly, but I caught her glance once. She leaned into the woman beside her and said, "She's the sister, isn't she? The one who's always off working." I smiled into my glass. "Yes, Marilyn, I am the one who's working while you're busy perfecting duck confit for charity brunches, the one who files patents instead of nail shapes." Rachel stood beneath the flower arch with Ethan, the kind of couple that wedding planners build portfolios on. Her gown was white with delicate beadwork, long train, backless but tasteful. She knew exactly how to tilt her chin, how to smile without showing too much tooth, how to keep Ethan's hand on her lower back, just enough to appear intimate but not possessive. I recognized the choreography. Rachel had always known how to perform love. Their vows were poetic and safe, his about her kindness and laughter, hers about his strength and generosity. They didn't say anything real, but it sounded nice, which for this crowd was what mattered. I clapped on cue, of course. I even smiled when the flower girl, rumored to be a toddler model flown in from Atlanta, tossed petals with practiced grace. It was perfect. Picture perfect. Painfully perfect. At the reception, I was placed between 2 distant cousins who still thought I worked in computers. "I figured you'd have someone by now," one said, twirling her martini pick. "A woman like you, all accomplished." I nodded. Yes, that's what usually happens, right? Women get handed husbands the moment they hit revenue milestones. She blinked, unsure whether I was joking. I wasn't. Not entirely. Meanwhile, Rachel floated between tables like a trained dove, her gown catching candlelight, her voice pitched just right for toasts and side comments. I watched her laugh at a joke she'd heard a dozen times. I watched her lean into Ethan during photographs, hand on chest, like every rom-com poster you've ever seen. She wasn't pretending, not really. Rachel believed in this image. She worked hard for it. I can't fault her for wanting something beautiful. I only ever faulted her for never asking what beauty cost the rest of us. Midway through the evening, she approached me. Her smile was tight, eyes scanning the room even as she spoke to me. "Hey, just wanted to check in. Make sure you're okay." I stared at her for a second. "I'm fine. You seem, distant." "I mean Rachel," I corrected, hearing myself default to her middle name, like I always did when I was annoyed. "We haven't had a real conversation in 5 years." She laughed, that soft, pleading kind of laugh. "Well, you're here now. That counts." I almost asked her if she even knew what I did for a living, if she'd ever read a single article about the company I'd built. But what would be the point? She was already walking away, back into her world of twinkling lights and curated laughter. I stayed by the bar, sipping ginger ale because the champagne tasted like sugar and glitter. Then I heard it behind me, just close enough. "She's pretty," someone said, "but you can tell. One of those women who marries her job." "Probably expects applause for showing up alone," another voice chuckled. "Logan's cousins, I guessed." I didn't turn, not right away. For a moment, I considered leaving. I knew exactly where I'd parked. My coat was draped over the back of my chair. No one would notice if I vanished before the first dance, but something held me. A pause in the music, a chair scraping back, slow, deliberate. I turned. Douglas Whitmore was standing. No fanfare, no clinking of glasses. Just a tall man in a navy suit, silver hair swept back, eyes sharp and unreadable. He moved past his family, past the couple of the night, past Marilyn, and he bowed. A full, clean, formal bow, right there in the center of that glittering ballroom. And just like that, the perfect wedding cracked. Gasps moved through the room like a shiver, soft at first, then more audible. A fork dropped somewhere near the cake table. The violinist trailed off mid-note. All eyes turned, not toward the bride or groom, but toward the man bowing in the middle of the ballroom. Douglas Whitmore didn't just nod. He bowed fully, deliberately, like he'd done it before in more formal settings. But never here, never for someone like me. His silver hair gleamed under the chandelier, his spine straight despite his age, and the gravity of his presence held the entire room hostage. I didn't move. I couldn't. Somewhere near the front, Marilyn looked like someone had knocked the air out of her. Rachel was frozen, hand still hovering near a flute of champagne. Ethan blinked, confused, trying to smile like this was all part of some prearranged toast, but it wasn't. Douglas straightened, then walked toward me with the calm assurance of someone used to reshaping rooms with nothing but intention. His suit wasn't flashy, just impeccably tailored. No gold cufflinks, no loud watch, no nonsense. He stopped in front of me, his voice low, steady, but clear enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Miss Morgan," he said, "it's a privilege to finally meet you." I blinked. A dozen people shifted in their chairs. Some leaned forward. "Your keynote at the Monterey Tech Summit," he continued, "changed how our firm handles real-time AI deployment across 3 major subsidiaries. I owe you a thank you." Something inside me unclenched. He didn't say it like a performance. He said it like a correction. I offered the faintest smile, the kind that hides more than it reveals. "Thank you, Mr. Whitmore. That's mutual." He didn't return to his seat. Instead, he turned to the nearest waiter and said calmly, "A club soda, please." Then back to me. "Would you mind walking with me for a moment?" I nodded. The whispers started before we reached the edge of the room. People reweighing me, recalibrating. The woman who had arrived alone, suddenly she wasn't an afterthought. She was someone Douglas Whitmore not only recognized, but publicly respected. We stepped onto the venue's stone terrace. The air outside was cooler, cleaner. String lights flickered along the perimeter. The murmur of music continued behind us, muffled by the thick glass doors. "I wasn't trying to make a scene," Douglas said. "I know," I replied. "You were trying to make a point." He smiled faintly. Some illusions deserve to be broken. I studied him, his posture, his expression. He didn't carry the same thin politeness the others wore like perfume. He was sharp, alert. His silence felt deliberate, not dismissive. "I meant what I said in there," he added. "I recognized you the moment you walked in. Your firm's integration model for decentralized diagnostics changed our entire tech transition playbook." "That wasn't public information," I said carefully. "It wasn't," he agreed. "But I make it my business to know who's actually changing the landscape behind the scenes." His words settled into the cracks I didn't realize were still open inside me. I had spent so long bracing against silence, against not being seen, that being seen with such clarity felt almost dangerous. "I assume Ethan has no idea," I said. Douglas gave a short chuckle. "Ethan can barely reset his Wi-Fi router. He inherited his access. Claire, you built yours." That line stopped me cold. He was right. I had built everything, from pitch decks written on coffee-stained napkins to 3 a.m. code sprints on borrowed internet. I'd risked burnout, breakdowns, and bankruptcy, sometimes all in the same quarter. I had built something people used, something real, but to my family it had always felt invisible. "Why say this now?" I asked. "Because they needed to hear it," he said, tilting his head toward the ballroom. "And because you didn't come here expecting anyone to say it at all. That matters to me." We stood in silence for a moment. It was the first truly comfortable silence I'd had all day. Inside, the reception carried on. Barely. You could sense the shift. The energy had changed. Eyes flicked toward the terrace. People who had dismissed me were now watching, wondering. Marilyn looked like she was trying to swallow a lemon. Rachel's mouth was pressed into a thin, perfect line. When I stepped back into the room, a few guests stood, not out of politeness, but uncertainty. What was the proper etiquette when the most powerful man in the room had just acknowledged the woman they'd been quietly ridiculing? I returned to my table and sat. Douglas sat beside me. No grand announcement, just presence. Rachel approached moments later, bouquet trembling in her grip. "What was that about?" she hissed through a clenched smile. I met her gaze calmly. "That," I said, "was someone recognizing what you never did." Her expression cracked just a little. "You couldn't let me have one day?" she snapped. I almost laughed. "One day, Rachel? You've had a lifetime. All I did was exist." She turned sharply, heels clicking as she stormed off. And for the first time ever, her exit didn't bruise me. It relieved me. When the speeches began, I stayed quiet. Douglas remained at my table, offering the occasional remark that flew over most guests' heads. Then Ethan's father stood to toast. "To love, to legacy," he said, "and to all the family who came tonight, even those who prefer the boardroom to the ballroom." There were chuckles until Douglas stood again. "It takes very little talent to inherit wealth," he said, setting his drink down, "and even less to marry into it. But the woman beside me, Claire Morgan, has done neither. She's created value where there was none. She's earned respect in rooms most of you will never even enter. So, if we're raising glasses, mine is to her." Silence. No one laughed now. No one whispered. They listened. I didn't smile. I didn't stand. I just kept my hand on the stem of my glass, gaze fixed forward. Because in that moment, I didn't need applause. I had something better. I had been understood. Back in the ballroom, the air felt thinner. It wasn't just me. Everyone had shifted. Chairs squeaked slightly as people sat straighter. Glasses were lifted more cautiously. The eyes that once looked through me now darted over, hesitant, calculating. You could almost hear it, the mental backpedaling. That's her. She's someone. A few guests tried to recover by offering sudden, syrupy smiles. As I passed on the way back from the restroom, one woman even touched my arm and said, "I had no idea you were the Claire Morgan." I just nodded. They didn't really know, and truthfully, they never cared to. I wasn't angry. I wasn't vindicated. I was just done. A pause. "We didn't know," she added, "about Monterey, about Mr. Whitmore, about all that work you've been doing." "I know." She looked at me carefully. "We're proud of you, Claire." I met her gaze fully this time. "Why now?" She blinked. "Excuse me?" "Why are you proud now?" I repeated. "Because someone powerful said I matter, or because you finally believe I do?" She didn't answer. She just reached out, taking my hand in hers. Her grip was tentative, light, as if she expected I might pull away. I didn't. Not immediately, but I also didn't squeeze back. I let her hold it for a second, then I let go. She looked at me like she wanted to say more, like she was searching for the right sentence to undo 30 years of silence. But there are no words for that, not really, and I was done translating my pain into a language she'd understand. I didn't need an apology. I didn't even need regret. What I needed, what I had always needed, was for someone to see me when no one else was watching. But that window had closed. She meant, well, I believe that now. Maybe she always did. Maybe she thought she was protecting me by ignoring the parts of me that scared her. Maybe ambition, solitude, resilience, all the things she never understood, looked too much like defiance. But that was never what it was. I wasn't trying to rebel, I was trying to become. And she missed it. Not because she didn't care, but because she didn't know how to care for someone who didn't fit the frame she hung above the fireplace. "I'm happy for Rachel," I said finally. My mother looked confused. She got the life she wanted, and she worked for it in her own way. She nodded slowly. "She always needed a lot, and I never asked for much," I added. "Maybe that's why no one thought to offer anything." Her shoulders dropped, a sigh, maybe guilt, maybe just fatigue. "I wish we'd done better," she whispered. "I wish you had, too." She didn't flinch at that. Maybe she expected it. "Claire?" Her voice was quiet now, barely holding together. "Do you hate us?" I looked up at the sky for a moment before answering. "No," I said. "I stopped expecting you to be different. That's not the same as hate. That's peace." She bit her lip. "I just don't need what you're offering anymore," I added. "Not because it's too late, but because I've already given it to myself." She blinked, eyes shining, but no tears fell. She was too practiced for that. "I hope you're happy," she said. "I am," I replied, "and it has nothing to do with this night." She nodded, then turned back toward the ballroom without another word. I watched her walk away, not out of sorrow or satisfaction, but something quieter. Finality. That was our last real conversation. The next day, I'd board a plane back to Seattle. A new term sheet would be waiting in my inbox. My team would be prepping for a product launch, and Douglas would send the first draft of our charter, inviting me to reshape something that actually mattered. The world would keep turning, but I wouldn't carry that hunger anymore. The aching need for someone to finally say, "I see you," because I already had, and I'd never let myself become invisible again. Not for love, not for approval, not even for family. I didn't say goodbye, not to Rachel, not to Ethan, not to any of the people who had finally started looking at me like I was someone worth knowing. That's the thing about recognition. It feels hollow when it comes from people who once looked past you, not because you changed, but because someone told them you mattered. So I slipped away quietly as the music swelled into another round of choreographed joy. The night had settled into that golden phase where everything glittered just enough to distract from its own emptiness. Polished speeches, practiced laughter, one more toast to forever, while the servers reset champagne flutes, and someone's kid cried softly beneath the dessert table. I didn't want to be there when the sparklers came out, when the guests lined up for photos they'd forget by morning, when the Whitmore name would be hashtagged next to Rachel's smile, the same way it had been etched into monogrammed napkins and printed onto menus that would end up in the trash. I didn't want to perform gratitude. I just wanted to leave. So I walked past the valet, down the gravel path lit by hanging lanterns, heels in hand, cool stone underfoot. My rental car waited at the edge of the lot, quiet, unassuming. No one followed, no one noticed. And that, for the first time in my life, felt like freedom, because I wasn't leaving in shame. I wasn't walking out because I'd been excluded. I was walking out because I finally realized I didn't belong in a story that needed me small to make others feel big. So I wrote myself out. No confrontation, no dramatic closure, just the silent grace of a woman reclaiming her own time. I drove through the sleepy streets of Savannah, the windows cracked, letting the southern air wrap around me like silk. I passed magnolia trees and brick sidewalks, candlelit porches and laughter spilling from backyard patios. And I thought about how long I'd stayed in places that made me feel like a footnote, how often I had shrunk myself to fit the frame someone else had designed. All those years of trying not to make things uncomfortable, trying not to shine too brightly in rooms that only welcomed softness, trying not to be too much, and yet still never being enough. But not anymore. Not after tonight. I didn't feel triumphant. This wasn't a victory lap. It was something quieter, deeper, like breathing after holding it too long. There was no one in the passenger seat, no one waiting at home with flowers or congratulations. But I didn't feel alone. I felt whole. Because for the first time in decades, I wasn't waiting for someone to walk beside me just to prove I was worth the journey. I was already moving, already building, already becoming. No applause, just motion. And maybe that's what healing really is. Not the moment they finally say your name out loud, but the moment you realize you don't need them to anymore. Seattle welcomed me back with soft rain and overcast skies, home in its own melancholic, comforting way. The city didn't ask questions. It didn't blink when I walked through my apartment door, still wearing the same black dress I'd worn to the wedding. It simply existed like it always had, letting me slip back into my life like I'd never left. I made tea, not because I needed it, but because I needed a ritual. As the kettle warmed, I scrolled past a dozen new emails, messages from people who had been at the wedding, strangers now suddenly so inspired by my work, others offering potential synergies and possible collaborations. A few press inquiries from tech media wondering what it was like to be publicly endorsed by Douglas Whitmore. I deleted them all. That night had never been about them. I didn't want to ride a wave of belated recognition. I wanted to build something from stillness, from choice, no reaction. Douglas's charter proposal was waiting in my inbox, just as he said it would be. A clean document, no strings, just vision and infrastructure, and my name at the top where it belonged. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I opened a fresh notebook, one I'd bought months ago but hadn't dared touch, because part of me still believed I needed to arrive somewhere first. That night proved I already had. At the top of the first page, I wrote, "Build without apology." It wasn't a mission statement. It was a promise. 1 week later, I walked into my office. Glass windows, concrete floors, the quiet hum of servers behind the wall. My team was already there, heads bent over screens, coffee in hand, earbuds in. They looked up when I walked in, not with fanfare, but with familiarity. A few smiled. One of them said, "Welcome back, boss." Boss. Not sister of the bride, not the one who came alone. Just boss. I moved through the room, nodding at progress reports and prototypes and models still in testing. My lead engineer flagged me down. "That nonprofit hospital project you mentioned last month, we did a rough analysis. It's viable." I smiled. "Good. We're going to make it more than viable." And I meant it. Because for once, I wasn't building to prove anyone wrong. I was building because I finally understood what it meant to be right with myself. I still hadn't called my mother. There was nothing left to say. Rachel sent a text once, no apology, just, "I hope we can talk soon. Maybe get coffee when you're back in town." I read it twice, then set my phone down. Some bridges don't need burning. Some just quietly collapse from years of imbalance. And some you simply walk away from because you've learned that your peace is worth more than proximity. A few days later, Douglas and I met again, this time in a sunlit conference room overlooking Lake Washington. We talked numbers, but mostly we talked about people, about systems that deserved rebuilding, about work that had meaning beyond margin. "I'm not here to be anyone's figurehead," I told him. "I didn't ask for one," he said. We shook hands. No fanfare, no press release, just mutual clarity. Afterward, I walked down to the pier, sat with my shoes off and my feet dangling over the water. The sky was the color of graphite, the wind cool but not cruel. And for the first time in years, I exhaled without bracing for disappointment. This was not the life they had imagined for me, but it was the life I chose. Not the wedding photos, not the baby showers, not the country club smiles, but clarity, purpose, a quiet kind of power that didn't need to be displayed to be real. I didn't need applause. I didn't need a room full of people standing because someone told them to. What I needed, what I had always needed, was this: a life I could live in full voice, without shrinking, without asking permission, without waiting for someone to say, "Now you matter," because I had already said it to myself. And finally, that was enough.